All right, next, this is a common question that I get is how to charge for the narrative report. How to charge for the narrative report. So remember, all fees are local. Like doctors will ask me, say, what should I charge? Well, it totally depends. The East Coast is totally different than the Midwest. A major city fee is totally different than a rural area. So all fees are local. So what you do is you check with your local bar association for what is standard. Just call them and ask them. Typically, I'll call the secretary, and who you typically want to call is the trial lawyers association. Call the trial lawyers association, ask for the secretary, and just ask them. Say, hey, what's the standard fees? Not high or not low. What's a standard fee for a typical personal injury narrative report? That's it. Now, just so you're aware, the initial page typically is more. Typically, they'll say, well, the initial page X amount, and then the additional pages are less costly. Just so you're aware of that, okay? There's no charge for the addendums. So the narrative report might be 5 to 10 pages, okay? Something like that. 4, 5, 6, something like that. It's going to be the absolute core material. And then you'll see when we go through this, all the other material goes into what's called addendums. It just gets pushed out of the way. In other words, we want to take the clutter. We want to separate out the important information, and that's what's going to go into the pages of a narrative report. And we want to take out all that clutter, and we want to move it aside and put them into what's called put them into separate categories, and those we just call them addendums. Okay, but we don't want that clutter, and we're not going to charge for that clutter. Okay, so typically that's what you're looking at. Now, I recommend giving a 20% professional discount for referring attorneys. That's what I recommend. I do not try to make it a profit center. Too many times I've seen chiropractors, and these are typically the chiropractors that are terrible at personal injury. They don't know how to get personal injury. They don't know how to document it. So what do? They try to make a narrative report a profit center and bill the hell out of the attorney. So what you want to do is you don't want to make it a profit center, where you're just charging huge numbers. You want the attorney to be able to ask for a narrative report, not cringe at the cost of a narrative report. So what I always did is I always found out what is the standard for my area. And then I charged 20% less for my referring attorneys. In other words, I didn't want them to think twice about cutting a check for the cost of that narrative report. I didn't want there to be absolutely any issues whatsoever. Because remember, it's not the narrative report that's valuable for you financially. It's the referrals. And again, you don't want to just kill the goose that lays the gold egg. And I see this with chiropractors who don't know how to get referrals, don't know how to talk to attorneys, don't get an incidental personal injury case, and they blast the hell out of it with cost wise for therapies with the patient and the narrative report. They just wipe everything out with fees. Well, that's why they typically are terrible. Do not recommend charging. I do not recommend not charging. That does not look good in front of a jury unless you do not charge across the board. And that's just included in your medical reports. And you don't want to do that because that's not standard. It takes extra effort, and it takes a lot less extra effort after you know how to do, I always say after you do about 3 narrative reports and you have the templates, that's when it gets to be pretty easy. But the first one, definitely there's a huge learning curve typically in the first narrative report. Gets a lot less for the second and third. But by the time you have the third, you should have all the templates. You should know the formula, you should know the templates, and then you should, and literally it's just copy and paste, to be honest with you.